Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we'll be taking a look at Week 15 of the NFL schedule and then looking at our power rankings. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off on Thursday Night Football, we've got a divisional matchup between the Rams and the 49ers. The Rams, they're coming off a major win over the Buffalo Bills in one of the best games of the entire year, where they won 44-42 in a game where there were no punts. Both teams looked unbelievable on offense, but could not stop anything on defense. The Niners, on the other hand, they're coming off their most complete game of the entire season against the Chicago Bears, where they put up 38 points in a win. Their defense looked fantastic. They held the Bears to 0 points in the first half. Their offense looked incredible. They had 300-plus yards in the first half to the Bears' 4. Just an all-around great game by the 49ers. I do think this will be a close one, as most of these divisional matchups are. However, I'm going to go with the 49ers to win this one. Even though they're a slightly worse team than the Rams this season, I think they're going to split this, and the Rams won the first one very closely in a game that arguably the 49ers should have won, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams are able to pull this off, but I'm going to go with the 49ers to win. Moving on to Sunday, we've got a matchup between the Commanders and the Saints. The Saints, they're coming off a heartbreaking win in a game where they lost Derek Carr, but they won the game on a blocked field goal. It was a really great play by Brian Bursey, but Derek Carr unfortunately looks to have fractured his hand, his non-throwing hand, and will likely be out for the rest of the season. The Commanders, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye after having won the previous week against the Titans 42-19. It was a very complete game. They looked way back to form, as they hadn't looked the same in multiple weeks and had been on a losing streak. But it was a really good performance by them, and I think they're a much better team than the Saints, so I'm going to pick the Commanders to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Chiefs and the Browns. The Chiefs, they're coming off another devil magic win where they win by one score in the last seconds of the game. This time they won off a doinked field goal because it doinked in. Just all around impressive, just crazy that they keep finding ways to win. But this team is not consistent. They can't put up points very easily. Their defense has been worse and worse throughout the season. However, it did seem to pick up a little bit in that last game, and it's still a really good unit. It's just not playing at its finest. The Browns, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Steelers. Those divisional games tend to be close, and this one, the score made it seem closer than it really was. They scored a touchdown in garbage time to make it closer. However, it still was a two-score game. The Browns are not a very good team, and the Chiefs find ways to win. I think this will be a close matchup because all of the Chiefs' matchups tend to be really close, typically one-score games. However, I think the Chiefs will find a way to win, and so I'm going with the Chiefs. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Bengals and the Titans. The Bengals, they're coming off a win on Monday Night Football in the Simpsons game over the Cowboys. They looked really good on offense. Their defense, as always, has some problems. But they were able to hold the Cowboys to 20, but that is with a backup quarterback, so it wasn't all around that impressive of a defensive performance, but their offense looked fantastic. Jamar Chase looked amazing. Chase Brown looked great. Joe Burrow looked great. And T. Higgins did have a bit of a down game, and they were still able to perform well on offense. The Titans, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars with Mac Jones, their backup quarterback, starting against the Titans. And they still were not able to get that win. They're a really bad football team. Will Levis wasn't even the problem last week. They just can't get anything going on offense, even if Will Levis isn't playing terrible. And their defense, while it has its moments, they let up a lot of points typically. And so I don't think the Titans are a very good team. I think the Bengals should be able to get this win pretty easily, although I wouldn't be surprised if the Titans are able to score a decent amount, given it's the Bengals' defense, but the Bengals should still pretty easily win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Dolphins and the Texans. The Dolphins, they're coming off a win over the Jets in overtime, where they looked decent on offense. Tyreek Hill looked back to form. He looked really good. Jalen Waddle continues to play impressively, and Tua's playing really well. And that run game looks good. But their defense really was a letdown against the Jets, as the Jets have struggled all season on offense, and Aaron Rodgers threw for 300 yards for the first time in almost 3 years. So it was a really bad performance by the Dolphins defense. Texans, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week. They needed it. They need to rest up as they've been very inconsistent this season. They barely were able to squeak out a win over Mac Jones and the Jaguars in the previous week, 23-20. They're a really good team. They're just inconsistent. And so I don't have a lot of hope for them at this point, and I realistically think this could be a really close matchup. I am still going to pick the Texans, but I do really like the Dolphins in this matchup, especially with how the Texans have been playing lately. But I feel like I still can't pick against the Texans because they do find ways to win most of the time. So I'm going to go with the Texans to win this one, but I really wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins upset them. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Ravens and the Giants. The Ravens, they're coming off their bye, which is, as I keep saying for everyone, it's a really late bye, but it's needed. They had previously lost to the Philadelphia Eagles in their most recent game, 19-24. Their offense did not look up to standard. Their defense played a lot better than it had been, though. And so I do think against a defense that isn't as good as the Philadelphia Eagles, their offense should be able to get back to form, and their defense should be able to continue playing at least better than they had been at the beginning of the season. The Giants, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss, off a blocked field goal to the Saints. They're a really bad game. Bad team, but they find ways to lose games. Drew Lock had 8 missed passes on his first 8 pass attempts. He was 0 for 8. That all being said, Lamar Jackson's only loss to an NFC opponent up until he recently lost to the Eagles was against the Giants. I don't think this Giants team, though, is going to be able to compete, as the Giants are not a good team and the Ravens are a good team, so I'm going to pick the Ravens to win this one pretty easily. Moving on, we've got another not great matchup, this one between the Jets and the Jaguars. The Jaguars, they're coming off a win 10-6 over the Titans with a backup quarterback. Not really much to be said about them. They don't really have a lot of hope. Trevor Lawrence is likely out for the season. They really can't get anything going on offense. Their defense did pick up the pace, though, against the Titans, so that's something, at least, to lay their head on. The Jets, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Dolphins in overtime. It was Aaron Rodgers' best performance of the season. Their offense actually looked pretty good, but they just couldn't get the win, and their defense continues to be pretty poor. The Jets are a better team, though, than the Jaguars, and the Jaguars are starting a backup quarterback, so I am going to say the Jets win this game. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it's close in the sense that both teams are not very good, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they keep it if the Jaguars keep it close, but I don't think they win that game. I think the Jets should win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Cowboys and the Panthers. The Cowboys, they're coming off a loss to the Bengals on Monday Night Football. They have been ruled out of the playoffs now with that loss. Their offense did look a lot better, but their defense just continues to play pretty poorly. The Bengals could really do whatever they wanted against the Cowboys. The Panthers, on the other hand, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Eagles, 16-22, in a game where Bryce Young, again, played really well. He's really on a hot streak lately and has been showing a lot of improvement. That offense has looked a lot better. That defense has looked a lot better. They were able to hold the Eagles to 22 points with how explosive that offense is. That is really impressive. But they still aren't winning games. They lost a really close one to the Chiefs. They lost a really close one to the Eagles. I do think they'll actually be able to win this game, though, against the Cowboys, especially considering the Cowboys' quarterback situation is either Cooper Rush or Trey Lance. I do think the Panthers have a really good chance, especially against a bad defense that the Cowboys have. So I'm going to go with the Panthers in what I think will be a close game, but I think the Panthers will come out with a victory. Moving on to the 3 o'clock windows, we've got a matchup between the Buccaneers and the Chargers. The Buccaneers, they're coming off a win over the Raiders in a game where they scored 28 points and only let up 13. Their defense looked really good. Their offense looked really good. Baker Mayfield does have an interception problem is the only thing I do want to comment on. He's been throwing a lot of interceptions. He's been fumbling the ball. He's got a turnover problem. But besides that, he's throwing a lot of touchdowns. The team is operating really well. Even with Bucky Irving exiting that game with an injury, their run game still looked good under Rachaad White and Sean Tucker. They're a pretty good team. The Chargers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football in a game where they lost by a field goal right at the end that got doinked in. They've been playing a lot better throughout the season than they had at any point under their previous head coach. But it still doesn't seem to be enough to be able to take down teams as good as the Chiefs or the Ravens, as they've been able to lose to both of those teams recently. However, they are a good team. They were missing Ladd McConkey in that game against the Chiefs, and I do think if he comes back, that'll be a huge boost to that offense. Missing J.K. Dobbins and not having him for that run game has been a huge detriment to that run game, and he won't be back likely for a few more weeks, so that is definitely a hurt to them. And I think this will be a really close game. I think both of these teams are really impressive. They're both on the rise this season, but I'm not really sure who to pick, truthfully. I think it's pretty much a 50-50 shot. And I think it's just going to depend on how well Baker Mayfield plays and how well he can avoid turning over the ball. If he turns over the ball a lot, I think the Chargers take advantage of that and win. But if he doesn't, I think that the Buccaneers can come away with a win. That being said, I think given how good the Chargers defense is and how Baker Mayfield has been playing, I think he will turn the ball over enough that the Chargers will take advantage and win that game. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Buccaneers came away with a victory. I'm just going with the Chargers instead. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Colts and the Broncos. The Colts, they're coming off a bye. They needed it. They, just as all other teams do at this point in the season that haven't had their bye. Anthony Richardson, he's been playing decent lately. That offense has been performing relatively well. Jonathan Taylor just needs to step up his pace as he's been inconsistent this season, which is a disappointment. The Broncos, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week as well after having won their game on Monday Night Football against the Browns in the previous week. That was a really good game. Their offense looked really good. Their defense was a problem, though, as Jameis Winston was able to throw all over them, and their defense is supposed to be really good, so that was definitely a concern. The Broncos are a better team than the Colts, but this game means more to the Colts than it does the Broncos, as the Broncos currently own that playoff spot, and the Colts are fighting for that last playoff spot from the Broncos. So if the Colts win this game, they stand a much better chance of making the playoffs, and the Broncos stand a worse chance of making the playoffs. So it does mean a lot for both teams. I do think the Broncos are a better team, but I think this will be a really close matchup. I am going to go with the Broncos to win this game, as I think Bo Nix has been playing really well this season. There's a good likelihood he wins Offensive Rookie of the Year, and I just don't feel like I can pick against this team with how they've been playing lately, especially after that Atlanta Falcons game a few weeks ago, and then even by being able to prove that they can win through their offense in a shootout game against Jameis Winston and the Browns. I think that proved a lot, as their defense had been carrying them a lot this season. So I think the Broncos win in what I think will also be a very close matchup. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Patriots and the Cardinals. The Patriots, they're also coming off a bye, as all other teams have needed that bye. The Patriots definitely do. Drake May's been playing pretty well this season, though, and their offense has looked definitely better since he took over. Their defense is pretty problematic, though. The Cardinals, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Seahawks, their second loss to the Seahawks this season, 30-18. They just couldn't get the ball moving most of the game, and their defense really couldn't stop a lot. Zach Charbonnet ran all over them. The Cardinals are not nearly as good of a team as they seem to be throughout the first half of the season. However, they're still a better team than the Patriots. I'm going to choose the Cardinals to win this game. Moving on, we've got what could be the game of the week, or even could be the game of the season. We've got a matchup between the Bills and the Lions. The Lions, they are coming off a win on Thursday Night Football over the Packers in a game where they won by a field goal. They had a bunch of ballsy calls, as Dan Campbell was able to go for it on fourth down 5 different times, and they succeeded on 4 of those attempts, including 2 touchdowns, and also the game-winning play that ran the clock down for them to kick that field goal. He was really ballsy, and it paid off, and they won that game. And they beat a really good team while doing it. Their offense is unbelievable. Their defense has been playing lights out, except for in that Packers game. But the Packers have a really good offense, so that's not surprising. The Bills, on the other hand, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss where Josh Allen became the first quarterback ever with 3 passing and 3 rushing touchdowns in a game, and he still lost that game. First quarterback ever to lose a game with 6 touchdowns and no turnovers. Just an amazing performance by Josh Allen and that offense, but a terrible performance by their defense. And I think if their defense plays like they did against the Rams, the Lions should get this win pretty easily. That being said, I think the Bills' defense picks it up after that poor performance, but I think that'll make this a really close game. I am still leaning towards picking the Lions. However, I think the Lions are in a position where they're able to lose a game or two, and this seems like the most likely game that they could lose. As the Bills are a really good team, they're really looking to rebound after a loss last week, and so I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions don't win this game. And I'm actually going to pick the Bills in a game that I think is more likely to lean towards the Lions in the slightest, but I have a feeling the Bills are going to be able to rally and win this game after such a close call last week. And if that offense can perform as well as it has been, especially like last week, they should be able to come away with the win. So I'm going with the Bills. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Steelers and the Eagles. The Steelers, they're coming off a win over the Browns. Their defense looked pretty good. They held the Browns to only one touchdown for most of that game. Their offense also looked pretty good. Russell Wilson continues to impress. The Eagles, on the other hand, they're one of the best teams in the entire league. They did almost lose to the Panthers, but as I've been saying, the Panthers have been playing a lot better lately, and I think that it is just an impressive performance by the Panthers and not a poor performance by the Eagles. The Eagles were still able to come away with that victory, and their offense still looked really good. Saquon Barkley continues to lead the league in rushing yards and lead that offense to wins over and over, as their run game is unbelievable. And Jalen Hurts continues to play really well as well. And the pass game looks pretty good, just not nearly as good as that run game. This game is actually seemingly pretty close, as the Steelers are a top team in the AFC and the Eagles are a top team in the NFC. I think this will be a really close matchup, and while I think there's a really good chance the Eagles can win this game, I'm actually going to go with the Steelers to squeak away a victory here in what I think is going to be a really close game, because while the Eagles' defense is unbelievable, they've been playing a little bit worse lately, and the Steelers' defense is still one of the best units in the entire league, and their offense has been performing a lot better lately, especially in the past game. So I do think the Steelers will win in what will be a very close game against the Eagles. Moving on, we've got a matchup on Sunday Night Football between the Packers and the Seahawks. The Seahawks, they're coming off a massive win over the Cardinals to maintain their lead of the division, and they played amazing on offense and pretty good on defense. Their defense has continued to play really well and impress over these past few weeks. And their offense looked unbelievable last week, especially Zach Charbonnet, who came in for an injured Kenneth Walker and just ran away with it. The Packers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Lions on Thursday Night Football in a game where they only lost by a field goal to one of the best teams in the entire league. It was a really impressive performance by the Packers, and I do think the Packers are a better team than the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks will be able to put up a good fight, but I don't think they're going to win this game. I think it'll go to the Packers. Moving on to Monday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Bears and the Vikings. The Vikings, they're coming off a win over the Atlanta Falcons in the Kirk Cousins revenge game, as Kirk Cousins was not able to get his revenge, and the Falcons fell 21-42. In a game that seemed closer than that score ended up being, but the Vikings did play a really good game, especially on offense, as Sam Darnold threw for 5 touchdowns. Their defense also played pretty well and had a few takeaways for Kirk Cousins. The Bears, on the other hand, they had their worst performance maybe of the whole season. They arguably had one of the worst first halves of any team in NFL history, as they let up over 300 yards of offense in that first half compared to their 4 yards of offense. Really poor performance by the Bears, both on offense and on defense. But I do think they'll be able to bounce back pretty well and make this a close game. That being said, I do still think the Vikings will win this game, but I wouldn't be surprised. These divisional games tend to be really close. The Bears played the Vikings really close last time. I wouldn't be surprised with either outcome. However, I don't think in my right mind I can choose the Bears with their 7-game losing streak and with an interim head coach and with how they played last week. But I really wouldn't be surprised if this is a close game. I'm just picking the Vikings. And finally, also on Monday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Falcons and the Raiders. The Raiders, they're coming off a loss to the Buccaneers. They're one of the worst teams in the league. They also lost their second starting quarterback, as both Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell have both gone down with season-ending injuries. So now they're on to Desmond Ridder. The Falcons, on the other hand, they are playing a lot worse lately. Kirk Cousins, over the last 4 games, does not have a touchdown and has over 8 interceptions. He's been playing pretty bad, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do replace him with Michael Penix at some point this season, especially if he continues to play this way, and because they're losing the division now to the Buccaneers. The Falcons still, though, are a much better team than the Raiders. Their offense performs pretty well most of the time, especially when Kirk Cousins does play well. And their defense isn't very good, but the Raiders aren't much of a formidable opponent to go up against. So I do think that defense can play pretty well against the Raiders, maybe except for Brock Bowers. But the Raiders are not a good team, so I'm going with the Falcons to win. Moving on to the power rankings. I've got a few honorable mentions. The Texans, they've been playing really well. They were just on bye, but they've been playing really well. They have found some ways to lose games that they shouldn't have been losing, and so I can't justify putting them on the top 10 quite yet. However, they are a really good team. They're really explosive. And while CJ Stroud is having a down second year, that team on offense, especially with Nico Collins, has been playing a lot better lately. Another honorable mention, the Chargers. They did just lose a game to the Chiefs, but they held it really close, and that was without their number one receiver. They've been playing a lot better, but they've got some injuries, especially to their run game, as J.K. Dobbins is going to miss some time. And finally, but their defense is unbelievable. And finally, my last honorable mention is the Buccaneers. They're really picking up the pace, but Baker Mayfield has a turnover problem, so I don't know how much I can trust that team to continue at this pace, but they've been playing really well. Moving on, though, to number 10, I've got the Broncos. Their defense has been unbelievable, and recently their offense was able to prove that they can win games too. Bo Nix is very much in the running for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and they're just having a really impressive performance this season, so they're at 10. At 9, I've got the Seahawks. They're seemingly the best team in their division, although the Rams are a pretty close second. But the Seahawks are playing really well on defense. Their offense has been picking up the pace. Their run game looked a lot better last week, and so they just seem like a well-rounded team, and for that reason, they're at 9. At 8, I've got the Packers. They did lose to the Lions, and they have lost to the Vikings, and they've lost to the Lions twice, actually. But besides their division, the only other game they've lost was to the Eagles in Week 1, and they're just a really good team. They're just unfortunate to be in the NFC North, which is the most competitive division in the league. But I still got to give them credit. They're in at number 8. At 7, I've got the Ravens. They've been playing really well on offense. Although inconsistently, and their defense has not been playing that well. But when it plays well, it plays really well. So they've got a lot of potential. They just don't always live up to it. So for that reason, they're in at 7. At 6, I've got the Chiefs. They're winning a bunch of close games. They've only lost one game the whole season, but they aren't winning decisively. It isn't their brand of football, and so every game comes down to a nail-biter, and because of that, I can't reasonably put them any higher, but they do find ways to win, which is the most important stat, and so they come in at number 6. At 5, I've got the Vikings. They've been playing unreal on defense. They have one of the best defenses in the whole league, and lately, their offense has been playing really well, as Sam Darnold just threw for 5 touchdowns against the Falcons. They're a really well-rounded team. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are a great receiver duo, and they've just seemed unstoppable lately. Number 4, I've got the Steelers. They've been playing really well on defense. Their offense has really picked up the pace under Russell Wilson. Their run game and pass game have looked a lot better under him, and that defense continues to be one of the best in the league. So for that reason, they're in at 4. At 3, I've got the Bills. While they did just lose a nail-biter to the Rams, they put up 42 points and didn't turn the ball over or punt. It was an impressive performance on offense. Their defense just needs to find its rhythm after last week because it had been playing really well all season up until that point. Definitely not the performance you wanted to see out of the Bills defense, but I'll cut them some slack and say their offense played really well. Now their defense just needs to pick back up the pace to where they had been the rest of the season, and they'll be back on track. And number 2, I've got the Eagles. They are the second best team in the NFC. They have gone on a 9-game winning streak. Their defense is unreal. Their offense runs through Saquon as he's the best running back in the whole league right now and leads the league in rushing yards. Just a really impressive performance by them all season. And then at number 1, I've got the Lions. They seem to be the best team in the whole league. They're beating up on teams that are also really good. They beat the Packers twice. They beat the Vikings. They're just playing really well. They're the leaders of their division. It's a really impressive performance. Their offense is unstoppable. Their defense looks unbelievable, even with all the injuries to their defense, because they're missing like between 7 and 10 people on defense that are starters, 7 of which are on IR. Really bad for their defense, and yet they're still finding ways to win, and their defense is still playing impressively. So for that reason, they're in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on my socials on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, I'm going to sign out. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.